Hi everyone, my name is Ava Coleman and I'm going to be discussing my crisis communication case study on Apple Inc. Apple recently had a privacy crisis where they allowed private contractors to listen to their users' private information and private Siri audio recordings. And so we're going to kind of talk about that today and how they handled the crisis. And so let's just jump right into it. So kind of jumping into this here, the industry that Apple Inc. is in is the computer and electronic product manufacturing industry. So they are a publicly owned company, and so they were founded in 1976. And they are also a global electronics company. So some fast facts about Apple here is that they are headquartered in Cupertino, California. And they employ over 132,000 employees, and that is globally. And so also they were the first private sector company to be worth over $1 trillion, which is a pretty cool accomplishment. So moving on to Apple's mission statement here. Apple's mission statement lately has gotten a lot of criticism because it really isn't much of a mission statement at all. It doesn't really talk about their company values or what they want to do as a company. But Apple's mission statement right now states that Apple designs Macs, the best personal computers in the world, along with OS X, iLife, iWork, and professional software. Apple leads the digital music revolution with its iPods and iTunes online store. Apple has reinvented the mobile phone with its revolutionary iPhone and App Store and is defining the future of mobile media and computing devices with iPad. So moving on to the timeline of the privacy crisis here, it really all started on July 26th of 2019 when The Guardian released an article stating that Apple contractors are paid to listen to private user messages. So a couple of the contractors actually came forward kind of stating that they believed that what they were doing was wrong. They stated that they actually heard Apple users having sex or during private doctor appointments, going over their medical records, and so they felt like they shouldn't be hearing this information or sharing it to kind of help figure out the Siri problems that they are having, and so that's really where this all started. So then on July 30th of 2019, Fortune also released an article addressing the misconstrued privacy policy of Apple, and that kind of went along for the same guidelines as the Guardian article, which kind of talked about Apple's privacy policy and where it is lacking. And then on August 1st of 2019, Apple spokesperson Kat Franklin released a statement to the public stating that it is going to get rid of the grading system and also make some policy changes to their privacy policy. And then on August 28th of 2019, Apple, via Kat Franklin again, apologized on their company website for the Siri privacy scandal and announced privacy changes, which we will talk about later on in the presentation. So moving on to the financial impact here, as you can see circled here with the arrow pointed at it, Apple did kind of experience a dip in their stocks towards the end of July, early August. And so this could be kind of associated with the release of the article because it was highly criticized that Apple was doing this and people really didn't want to be a part of that. But as you can see, their stocks began to go up in September with the release of some new products. So overall, it did not impact them too much financially, and so it really didn't have that big of an impact on the company as a whole. So moving on to the crisis type for this crisis here, it is a transgression. So transgressions are intentional acts taken by an organization that knowingly place stakeholders or publics at risk or harm. So Apple's crisis is categorized as a transgression because they were knowingly listening to users' private conversations and using them without the user's permission. This really counts as a transgression because they were knowingly doing this. They knew that what they were doing was wrong, that they knew that they shouldn't be using their users' information in this way, and so kind of the fact that they were knowing what they were doing was wrong is really the main reason why this is a transgression. So for this type of transgression, They do have a few suggested crisis communication strategies as previously talked about in the Cornelius chapter. So the first one would be the acceptance policy, which is to claim accepting responsibility for culpability for the crisis. And under this kind of falls the full apology strategy, which is simply apologizing for the crisis and accepting the blame, which Apple does in their statement that they released on their website that we will talk about later on. They also, it also falls under the remediation policy, which is a tactic of announcing some form of compensation or help to their victims. And then, of course, the repentance strategy, which is apologizing for the crises and asking stakeholders to forgive its misdeeds. And then also we have the accommodative strategy, which is claiming promising to prevent the crisis from reoccurring. So under this falls rectification, which is a tactic of taking corrective action to prevent a reoccurrence of the crisis in the future, which Apple actually does in a couple of the statements that they released, which we will talk about later on. So public statement number 1 was given on August 1st of 2019, and it was Kat Franklin to TechCrunch directly. So in this public statement that was given to TechCrunch from Apple's Kat Franklin, you can see here that Apple is using the rectification strategy to fight this crisis. They are taking full responsibility and they are promising to make changes in the future. Here, Kat Franklin states that they will make the grading optional so users know that they are being listened to. So for public statement number 2, it was released on August 28th of 2019, and this was released to Apple's website. So this statement here was the formal statement given by Apple on their company website via Kat Franklin again. And so here they do follow the full apology strategy by apologizing for their misuse of the private information. And then once again, they use the rectification strategy by apologizing for this misuse of the private information, and they use a rectification strategy to fully explain the changes that they are going to be making to ensure that this does not happen again. So moving on to the evaluation of how Apple really did handle this crisis. They did have a few strengths and weaknesses, so I thought that their first strength was that they did announce the privacy changes necessary. So they announced privacy changes ensuring user privacy to make sure that all Apple users with a Siri device their user information is kept private. They also promised upgrades to all Siri devices to ensure privacy. They also took responsibility for the privacy violation, which I really respect. They accepted that they did wrong and they did fully apologize for what they did. And then they made revisions to their current privacy statement again to kind of accept that responsibility. So one of the biggest weaknesses that I felt that Apple had with this handling this crisis was the timing of their response. So it took the company an entire month to respond to the accusations, which I felt was way too long for the severity of the privacy violation that they committed. And then months passed before the company finally announced changes to the privacy statement. Also, I felt that Apple really did downplay the situation. They claimed that the saved audio recordings were routine behavior for any company to kind of help make changes to their devices and help improve their policies. And so they kind of tried to shift the blame to other companies in their privacy policies. So they shifted the blame to Google and Amazon with the Alexa, and just kind of shifting the blame, saying that they do the same thing, and even though that doesn't make it right. So I felt like that was one problem that they really had with how they addressed this policy. So moving on here to the recommendations. The first recommendation that I would give Apple is to announce new improvements to their privacy policy. I think that Apple needs to improve their privacy statement even further than they did. It needs to ensure that all users' privacy is not to be used without their permission. Right now, the policy is still pretty vague as to what right Apple has to the user's information and how they can use it for their company. So I think that they really need to make this policy clear to ensure that a crisis like this does not happen again in the future, and to make sure that their users know exactly how Apple is using their information. And kind of along with that, I think that Apple needs to create a better procedure for announcing changes. So right now, they of course just release a million word statement with fine print that leaves their users confused and not actually knowing what the changes are. And so I think that they need to announce these changes on more platforms to reach their users. With Apple being such a huge company, I feel like they don't actually address all of their users properly. And so with having so many users, it is hard to address every policy and every procedure that they might make a change to. But right now, they really only address their policy changes on their company website. I think that they need to use more of their social media and more of just sending notifications out to their users to make sure that they understand clearly what is going on. And so I feel like this is something that they could really improve on. And so with these recommendations, I feel like they could really help them to prevent another crisis in the future. So if they were to implement these recommendations, I feel like it could really help them combat anything that might happen to them later on with such another privacy crisis along the way. So I feel like these recommendations could really help them in the future. So kind of in conclusion here, Apple could have done better with addressing this privacy crisis that they had, but of course no one is perfect. And so they did accept and apologize. What they did was wrong, and they did make changes to their policy, which I really respect them doing. And I really do respect them accepting full responsibility for what they were doing was wrong. And so I kind of felt like it was cool to kind of see the strategies that they used and that we talked about in this chapter kind of play out in real life. And so like they did use the full apology strategy and the rectification strategy and promising that they were going to make changes. But, I kind of felt like with Apple being a bigger company, they would have handled it a little bit better. And so I felt like they could have kind of had things together more, but I think that with maybe the recommendations that I gave, that they would be able to make some improvements in the future to kind of prevent crises from happening like this again. So thank you so much for listening to my crisis communication case study about Apple Inc. and their privacy crisis. I hope that you were kind of able to see how the strategies that we talked about in this course kind of play out in real life. And so I really hope that you enjoyed it. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great day, guys. Thank you.